So I'm just gonna go ahead and start my introduction. So Sam is a dear client of ours. For how long have we worked together, Sam?
Has it been like 5 years, I think?
Yeah, could be 5 years.
Yeah.
She's not only a amazing architect, an entrepreneur, a fierce woman, but someone that is constantly um, trying to um, fight for her principles and what she wants to do, but at the same time trying to understand the game so that things can actually be achieved. And throughout these years, I've watched her aim for things and get results over and over and over and grow her practice a lot and grow her type of clients, not only in like how much bigger they are, but more like how much more aligned they are to what she actually wanted. Um, so it's been amazing to witness and help from our side all these years, what you've done. And one of the things that I know that you've always cared about, and it's a big part of what you think about architecture and what you want, and let's see how you'd like the world to be, is sustainability. Um, and so when we started talking about like how to go about this webinar, she's like, "Oh, I want to talk about, you know, more of the architecture parts of sustainability." And I was like, "What if we start talking about like how you can get those clients?" Because I've seen so many other clients of ours, like every time I go to New York, all they talk to me about is like sustainability. Same thing in LA, like California. But it's like, are you actually getting those clients? How do you get those projects? Do those projects, if you get them, get billed? And what goes into that? And I think it's a super interesting topic. And I give it to you, Sam. Why don't you enlighten us with your experience?
Great. Thank you, Camila. I really appreciate it. And likewise, it's been an amazing experience I've had over these last few years working with world teams. I mean, the staff is just amazing. Everybody that I have, I shouldn't even say staff because they're my teammates, like my team members. We work together daily, and it's just been such a great experience. And they also share my passion and interests in sustainability and creating a more sustainable future and environment. So with that, I'm going to pull up my presentation for today. We just have a few slides here. All right. Let me know when you all can see. Okay, I see a thumbs up. That's good. Oh, looks like it's frozen. One second. Okay, here we go. So first things first, as Camila mentioned, I am very much pro sustainability and implementing as many sustainable measures into projects as possible and finding clients that align with my goals. Um, I think really what I've learned over the course of my career is there's a way to pitch sustainability. And as most architects, we believe in it. We go into this profession as designers of the built environment, wanting to make a difference, we think long term and for future generations. We want to make sure we are building stuff that's sustainable. But I've also noticed in my experience that architects aren't always the best salesmen. And so, really, I think that's a skill that we need to hone and develop. And so in the next 45 minutes, really the plan is to kind of look at a framework and scripts to turn your clients into saying like, okay, well, we'll think about that. And so, okay, yeah, let's do this, let's implement this, but show me the numbers. And so it really isn't this idea of theory. It's more about language that your clients buy and understand. So they're concerned with risk, they're concerned with return on investment, and the ease of ownership. Like, what is the burden or impact of these sustainable elements and measures on them? So we're going to try to make this a little bit more interactive. And so This is the first time that we're introduced Slido into our presentations. So if we have technical difficulties, we may have to do this old school. But if you all could just either open your phone or on your computer, you can log in here to slido.com, enter in the session number, and this will give us the option to then answer some questions. So everybody on here can participate. I'll leave it up for just another minute or a few seconds.
So while you're doing that, I gotta just who's in attendance. So is this primarily everyone architects?
I believe so. Camila, I don't know. Do you?
Yes, primarily architects. Yes, exactly.
And then how many of those are uh, either lead AP or some other sustainable certified professional?
I don't know if someone wants to show up hands, because I don't know. We didn't really ask before inviting them to the webinar.
We can ask maybe at the end. We're open for questions at the end, so we can go through and kind of see who has all of their credentials and what different programs. There's wellness, fitness, or fit. There's a bunch of various different programs and certifications. All right, so really looking at market and client motivation. So who's asking for sustainability? I think it's important to really break down the various types of clients. So we have homeowners, those that are designing for residential clients, really, and understanding the homeowners, their needs and concerns. Things like comfort in the design of their home, their bills, how much is it going to cost them to implement these measures, the resale value of their house, considering that, to general peace of mind, especially if they have children and it's something that they want to, hand down to future generations. Sometimes it boils down to lifestyle. And I've seen this more recently, peer envy, keeping up with the Joneses, and having kind of the latest features or the something that's hot on the market and implementing that. So all of those things are keep those in mind when you're trying to pitch or sell these sustainable measures to clients. For developers, it's a bit different. They're looking at, the bottom line is numbers matter for developers. They're looking at their net operating income. They want to understand lease up velocity. Will this element, whether you're, putting in solar panels or electrical vehicle charging stations or any other design feature that's sustainable, is it going to help them to lease or sell their units or their building? They're also concerned with the value, the cap rate, and looking at the potential rate of return, and as well as like the lender and the appraisal alignment. And so if these terms are foreign to you, this is where I recommend getting educated and understanding this, speaking the language and putting it in terms that they understand and that they can see the value in implementing these the sustainable or green measures. Also, institutions really look more for long-term resilience, also long-term OPEX or their operating expenses. They want to understand when you're implementing a program or feature, how's that going to affect them? And also, does it align with their mission? A lot of institutions have missions that they are either they stand behind, but they in some cases are required to implement various designs that align with their specific missions. And then last but not least, the public sector. That's much more community focused because it is public. And there's a lot of concern with general compliance for ordinances and regulations and overall the life cycle costs. So really understanding the language that your specific client is, understanding that language and speaking to them in that language and helping them to understand the value that these sustainable features that they'll deliver is really important. And to further that, what's really motivating those clients? One thing that I've noticed too, a lot of times, you're looking at a client, especially maybe like institutional, or in some cases even developers, private developers. They're looking at, what's their responsibility, but also what's their brand, and how does this impact, their reputation as a whole, and looking at the stakeholders involved. There's always various stakeholders in a project, and understanding who those stakeholders are is always always front of mind for your client. And so if you can put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, what are they worried about? What are they thinking about? That will help in terms of clarifying and selling these features to them. Also considering long-term savings. So you want to make it clear that there's a predictable operating expense for whatever feature. Again, I keep using the photovoltaics or the solar panels or electrical vehicle charging stations. Those are two kind of obvious ones, something that we do a lot here in California. I'm based in California. So and those, I find that when you can show them predictable operating expenses for those elements, that it helps. It really does help for them to get on board. And also showing them how you can hedge against utility volatility. So what I mean by that is, more recently in California, our electric bills and costs have really kind of skyrocketed recently for multiple reasons. We won't get into that. But, there's been over this past year a 10% increase. And so making it clear to clients, like, look, if you introduce solar panels, while there is this upfront cost, you're ultimately going to be saving for those long-term the utility volatility is what we call it.
May I also add one thing there, Sam? I come from a sales and marketing background, so like to me it was always obvious that you need, when you have something that's an advantage and you want to sell it, the person needs to know how to phrase that in something that would fit in a brochure, in one Instagram story, right? Like that's like what you're gonna sell, so that they immediately know how their marketing team can actually get a buyer for whatever, for a project. So like I'm not saying dumb it down, but I'm saying dumb it down. Like you need to be able, when you're pitching value to a developer, to any project like that in the end needs to someone to buy it, that it can actually be super understandable. Like the reality is that like this could make your your expense in electricity be a third of what it is over a period of 5 years, like and like that specific, which I find that in my conversations with architects, they're not that specific because they think like the other person speaks the language. They usually don't. And then even if they do, they're also going to face the problem of like, okay, the marketing person that maybe doesn't know about sustainability or architecture, they also need a catchy phrase, right? And they won't be able to translate. So if it comes directly to you, it's like, okay, you're giving me a selling point.
Yes. I love that. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there's this great book that I was recently reading, Pitch Anything, and it very much talks about how you're presenting your ideas to your clients. You're trying to sell something to anyone, whether it's a client or customer, and really dumbing it down. So getting to the point is super important, because as humans, the way we process it is what they call our lizard brain or crocodile brain is the first thing we see. Is it a threat? What's being presented to me, is it a threat or is it going to help me? And then a lot of times as architects, we get way bogged down into our architect lingo, and we take things to a level of detail that confuses our clients, even though they're in our industry and they may understand. We've still, to this day, I'm still guilty of it. I actually, this morning I had a call with a client, and that's exactly what happened. He's like, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you're talking about. So I had to kind of dumb it down. And I hate the term dumb it down, because it's like, I just had to explain it in a way that we're on the same, on the same page.
And not only that, that they will retain it,
Yes.
like we're
Yes.
bombarded by like social media and this and like, we're trying to know a little bit about politics, a little bit about economy, a little bit about like our trade, and so like we just need 3 pointers that are strong that either tell me, like you say, like is it saving me money or is it making me money?
Yes.
And that explanation needs to be very direct and very, very clear in your value proposition.
Correct. And give the numbers. I know you had said, you gave that example. People remember numbers. Give accurate numbers. Don't make things up, but people remember numbers. And so it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And I've done this in the past where I've given clients, when we've talked about sustainable measures, and we've looked at the numbers and we'll break it down. We'll say, okay, what's the cost here? What is, looking at the whole life cycle cost? What's the upfront cost? How long is it going to take to pay it? How long, are there any incentives? Are there any like rebates or programs or tax incentives? How long is it going to take to get paid back? And overall, what's the total life cost savings here? So we've broken it down in the past, and it's really helps because then they understand it, and they're more likely to then consider implementing those measures. And so another thing, jumping back to, excuse me, what we were saying about, talking about the long-term savings, and also I know in California, we have a lot of regulatory mandates here. So we're required to do things, but honestly, I really consider those bare minimums. And what I found too is in talking with clients, more recently, I had one client who he's a multifamily developer. He does condominiums, and he told me, this was actually very recently, he's like, I understand that now we need to provide 40% of all our parking spaces have to be EV ready, meaning you have to put conduit, you have to run the electrical. So this way, EV charging stations can be installed in parking garages in the future. However, he said his last building he built, he had done that. And unfortunately, he had major trouble selling the units because people wanted EV cars. They wanted, or even if they didn't have them, he said, they wanted the ability to do that. So if their next car they got, they could then they can charge it. So it's looking at the market too and understanding what are people's interests right now, in terms of sustainability, and finding those elements and those things that people do want, because it's more likely than your clients will implement those elements and stuff if they understand, oh, this is a desire, this is what people want, people are willing to pay for this. All right. And so here's gonna be our first test on the Slido. I'm curious, what factors have motivated your clients in the past to include sustainable elements or features? Like, are there specific motivating factors beyond what we've already mentioned or discussed, or maybe just elaborating on what we already mentioned or discussed? Let's see. Personal preference. To be the first. Interesting. So they just wanted to, it's interesting when clients are competitive and they just want to, they want to be the first. Health of the occupants. Yep. Peace of mind, comfort, and occupant health are big ones. There's the mandatory regulations, which they're forced to in that case. Those are usually my most difficult clients, are the ones who are like, oh, I'm forced to do this. This is mandatory. I'm like, yes, it is. All right. That's great. See, I see a few more people typing. Just give it a second. Responsibility of taking care of the planet, leave the world a better place. That's great to hear. Make the world a better place. I often don't always hear that from clients, so it's great to hear that that is durability. That is true. Because a lot, as we're designing too, not even just us as designers, as architects, but just in general, designers, manufacturers, people making products, we are considering that, and we're considering things in terms of like long term and how we implement them into our built environment. And so I think that that's good that we are really factoring that in. All right. Let's move on. So, oh, I'm glad Slido worked. I wasn't sure that was going to work, but so the reality, upfront costs dominate decision making. And if you haven't seen, there's kind of a theme here. It's all really about kind of numbers and money. And saying it plainly, cash flow wins arguments. Unfortunately, as architects, we do have this, we like to talk about the built environment and how we're positively changing things and what I like to call kind of the soft side of things. But in order to sell and really get clients on board, you really have to look at more the hard side of things. And so that's kind of the numbers. Getting into the numbers, I think, is important. But to Camila's point earlier, being clear about that is also really important. Just throwing numbers at people, that's confusing. You want to make it very clear and concise, but you want to give them concrete information so they can make those decisions, and a lot of times it will influence their decisions. You don't want to just look at the price tag of, what's the initial cost to implement this, but you also want to be thinking about what's your payback and what's your the risk hedge. So what are you doing to, maybe in the future avoiding retrofits? So, if you implement a system now, as opposed to, it may cost you, there may be a 15% premium on implementing this specific system, but in the long run, you are not going to have to retrofit it in 5 years when everybody is driving an electric vehicle. Or, I mean, that's just the example I've been using, but it's smart to think of those things up front and letting your clients know that. Sometimes you need to educate them. Sometimes they're not aware of it. You may assume they know and they don't. So you want to really show the total cost of ownership for them, and also the cost of not doing it and what that means and long term. The reality is, yeah, sorry, go on.
Another tool that maybe I'm saying something that everybody uses, right? But focusing more like in selling to developers, right? That are going to look at the number a lot, right? I don't know if as architects you focus also on like the resale price of the units and how would that look like, because sometimes something, of course, increases the cost, but that like disproportionately like augments like how you can up the selling price in the end, because like to your point, people value it more. And so understanding the translation on things that are not mandatory, okay, like this will increase a little bit the cost, but with this you can like sell this for a lot more, and also kind of dominating those numbers, it can make you win arguments, if because that is the language of developers, like, okay, this is your cost, this is how you're going to sell it. So I don't know if everybody's already using that or not, if they're kind of thinking about the translation of like if I think about it in a car, like, okay, I remember way back when I used to work in this car company, right? And like the screen for the radio and the GPS, I'm talking about a lot of years ago, it had a cost, but it would, or even a pool in a house, right? Like maybe it has a cost, but it disproportionately augments the value of the house, right? Versus other things in other places. And so like understanding that translation is also a very useful tool. I think we have a question from Carl. Anyone see financial lenders provide better terms for sustainability and design and constructed buildings? That's for you, Sam.
I cannot say on the lending side if I've seen, in some cases, yes, if you implement certain programs, and usually they're like government approved programs, in some cases locally approved programs, but most is like state. And I've seen that help in terms of lending and maybe a reduction in costs for, interest or other related things, but I can't speak to anything specifically. I don't know if anyone else on the call has seen that, if they have any experience. No, I'm seeing people shake their heads no. No. Okay. Yeah, for me, I've seen it, like I said, it's very specific. It's only very specifically, and I mean, it depends too, like public money. So I do a lot of affordable housing. So with affordable housing, you actually there's often these measures tied to the funding there. So you do have to have sustainable measures, and it's very specific things that you need to meet in order to get that funding. So yes, I have seen it in that case, but that's more institutional public money. From the private lending side, not as much, at least in my experience, unless again, it brings up a really good point. It gets me thinking, like, I wonder if there's even a spin to do it, start talking with maybe some more progressive lending institutions and saying, hey, we're looking at ways to reduce risks and ultimate long-term costs. So maybe there's a way, like a financial benefit upfront for for your clients. And so that may
Well,
be. Mhm.
I mean, if you think about on the lender side, so if for some reason, if someone defaults on a loan, right, wouldn't you want a building that's going to last longer? And so there should be some. I mean, one would think that there's a financial incentive of creating something that's more sustainable, more lasting. At the same time, that likely means that the borrower is not having to spend a whole lot of money on maintenance or utilities, and so they're more likely not to default on their loan. So I mean, there's actually aside from both the lender and the owner side that there is a potential of incentive. I have not seen it. I mean, I think if you go to a lender and you say, I've got a sustainably designed building or not, they don't look at it that way. They're just looking at the bottom line of here's, yes, it's got an appraisal and maybe
I
the
think
appraisal shows value, but an encouragement side, there's not a.
you're totally right, Carl. And you know what? I think if you take it to X or Twitter and like tag Elon Musk, like I'm not kidding, enough times just to raise up like the thing, maybe you get some attention, like uh right now is a moment where sustainability in general it's been talked about, so maybe in the midst of all that it can become something that people that have a lot of money start talking about.
It's true. And maybe that will make specific more progressive lending institutions or lenders in general really jump on that, because that's for them it could be a way to differentiate themselves too, because I don't really see it as much on the private side like I had mentioned. So, all right. So then really kind of understanding more of the pain points for us as architects and designers. You know, really we understand that it's hard to attract clients that are willing to invest in these green measures or sustainable measures. But there is also that time knowledge burden. So we assume that some of my clients know a lot more about development and the industry than I do. And others I've learned I do have to educate them. So a lot of times I'm educating them on various products, code requirements or regulations, other incentives. There's a lot of programs or tax incentives that may work for their project or their development that they're not familiar with. But also there's a lot of these programs are changing constantly and funding is changing. And so keeping up to date with it's hard as a professional. It really is, but it's important to do that and to educate yourself. So this way you can share that knowledge with your client, and then they will in turn, they're more likely to then invest in these green and sustainable measures. Um, Also, I found that sustainability usually gets value engineered out, but relatively late in the process. So sometimes what I try to do as we're designing is I try to really front load a lot of those elements into the design and have those discussions with the clients upfront in the initial design phases. Because when you bake in some of these measures into that baseline, they ultimately become non-optional. So I'm not saying trying to trick your clients, but really there's some things that you can do kind of upfront and have those discussions. So then later out, when there are cost concerns, when you're either looking at getting, funding for a project, or you're looking at, or there's cost concerns during construction, that those things don't get on they're not on the chopping block. So it's really important to consider that too as you're designing. All right, so another poll. What are some of the pain points that you've experienced when trying to promote or integrate sustainable design into your projects?
Come on, people, pains.
We all have pains. I have a lot of them. Yeah, upfront costs. With the upfront costs, I really find that trying to have an open discussion with the client and letting them know that there's value in it. And sometimes it's just won't work because the upfront cost is too high and they can't get the funding or the financing needed. But in other cases, sometimes I say, well, can we look at rebalancing the budget? And what I mean by that is, well, maybe there's another feature element here that you thought we needed and you thought it was necessary for marketing, but you can take the money there and put it into this other feature that may actually make you more money in the end. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, to kind of look, you almost have to get in the mind of the developer. You kind of become like a pseudo developer and think, okay, well, how can I take from here and put here? And that's going to help to continue to increase the value of the design that you're delivering, but you're still finding a way to pay for it up front. Coat. What's another pain point? A coat. I'm not sure I understand that one.
No, that probably was a misspelled cost.
Oh, cost. That makes it. Thank you. My mind couldn't make that leap, unfortunately. Yeah, it's cost. It's almost always cost. I'm curious though if there's anybody else who's had anything other than that, like if they've had a client who is just so against it. I've had clients that have been against it because of the process, like so LEED certification, for instance, and I've been on many LEED certified projects at various levels, silver, gold, platinum, and it's arduous. That process is extremely arduous. And between the reporting, the phasing, the commissioning, everything on it can be a lot. And so sometimes it's time consuming as well. So keeping that in mind too. All right, let's see what else we got here. Value engineering. Yep. Home builders like to cut valuable things out of design by telling the homeowner it's not required and then they can save money. Then the builder looks like a hero. Yeah, I experienced that a lot myself too, where there's a bit of this, I don't want to call it finger pointing, but kind of like this blame game that's like, oh, well, there's so much cost here, let's cut this out. That's where I think it's important for architects too, during the whole life cycle of a project, not just the design, to really stay involved, especially during construction, and have these discussions with your clients and the general contractor, kind of develop a relationship with them, because I've had that happen on projects as well. And I point out to the client, well, you can make this change and you can cut it out, but here's the impact. And this is what you want to know ultimately. And this is how you're going to be impacted. This is how it's going to affect costs down the road. This is how it's going to affect all the other systems in the project. So all of those things are, you want to have those conversations with them. At the end of the day, it's their project. They make the call. They're the ones ultimately, funding it or finding the financing for it. So, but it's important to to really have those discussions. Explaining
I'm gonna add one. I'm gonna add one to your list. Impact to end user.
Impacting the end user, like in a negative or positive way?
Negatively. So many of you stay in a hotel. Would you stay in a hotel if the water shut off after a 2-minute shower?
It's a good, I love that you mentioned that example, because that recently came up on a project that I was working on. And that was a discussion point is, well, wait, this limited amount of water that people get upset about that and they complain about that. And so this is where I would say, well, then, okay, that's fine. Maybe you don't want to implement this time limit for water usage because it does impact the end user. but could you do
Right.
reclaimed water? Like a reclaimed water system, and at the end of the day, the hotel occupant, I don't know how many, I mean, I've never gone to a hotel and walked up and be like, oh, by the way, is your water reclaimed? Like people aren't going to ask that. So maybe you find a different system. And
Yeah.
that's the other part too. Sometimes as designers and architects, we get fixated or, we're set on specific things or something that we truly believe in. And we try to, for lack of a better term, cram it down our clients' throats. And we don't necessarily want to do that. Maybe we want to say, okay, well, maybe I can't get exactly what I want here, but here's an alternative. Because isn't it better to have something and have, 80%? If you can't get the full 100%, get something in there. And so I think being a little flexible too is really important in our profession. Um, let's see, what else do we have here? Especially if it's explaining and convincing them why it's better and worth it, especially if it's something they can't see. The can't see things is really difficult, especially for clients that may not be, this may not be something that they like, a residential client, somebody who isn't in construction day in and day out and doesn't fully understand. So that can be difficult. I mean, I'll be honest, I've had trouble convincing my husband about implementing sustainable measures and features on our house. And that's exactly what he said. Well, I can't see it. I'm like, I get it, but again, using that same approach, here's the upfront costs, here's the cost savings, here's what's going to save us in the end. We plan on being in this house for X number of years, really, considering that. I won on some of the measures, not all of them. He overruled me on a few. So
And Sam, I want to go back to like this thing about the builder saying, okay, this is something you don't really need. That if from the get-go, your client perceives you as a person that's thinking about their pocket and not only about protecting your ideas or your design, you have a lot more leverage when that happens, right? Like, and because there's always distrust, you go to like a store, a clothing store, and if the person's too nice to you, you're like, they're gonna shop me that, they're not gonna give me the real advice if I look good in this dress, or this car is not that good. He's like, so like we have to consider that's part of the game, right? And so like, um, if you know that that's probably going to happen down the line, which is something that I also heard a lot from a lot of clients, right? Like there's this separation in the whole construction, like design to construction process, where everyone's kind of like pointing each other, like, no, this, and that, and then it's totally not connected, and just bad for the end client that this is happening, because a lot of things get lost in translation. So if you can, or to the best of your ability, make sure that the image that your client is having is you is that you're down to earth. You care about your design and your values, but you're down to earth, and you care about their pocket a lot. Which maybe a lot of say, oh, of course I do that, but like I've found a lot, like from clients that from friends and clients that have hired architects, that they still have that distrust, like, oh, the architect, like I lived in the Bahamas for a year, so, and the perception there was that all the architects designing those homes just wanted to build these amazing houses, and they didn't care at all about like the reality. That was the speech.
it's true. I mean, I have to say, I feel like I hate to speak ill of my fellow architects, but we do have a tendency to kind of, our value is in our design, right? What we provide, the value is through that. It's hard to communicate that. How do you communicate that this design or this value is really important? And at times there's a huge disconnect between our clients and us in terms of that, because at the end of the day, it does cost them money. And they say, okay, well, show me that value, show me what you're doing that's truly, and is it worth that value? And that's hard. It's hard to communicate. I used to, prior to starting my own practice, I used to work at Gensler, which is the largest architecture firm in the world, and they couldn't even define it. I remember there was one time we spent, a group of us were trying to kind of put together some materials and presentation, a way to kind of sell that to the clients and to say, like, here's the value of design. We had examples like, hey, we took this one post office, we converted it, we got a small fee, and in the end, the increase of that post office adaptive reuse was immense. And it was not even relative to the amount that we had put in and the time, effort, and energy to what we created. And so they want to capture, like, how do you do that? But it's hard to do that. It really is hard to do that. So again, I think just going back to really putting yourself in your client's shoes and being able to look at it from their point of view and being a little bit flexible and can really be helpful. The other thing I wanted to touch on here is I see that two people mentioned similar things, builders who are scared to try something new, and then the straw bale homes examples about a hard time from the insurance company. So, I mean, those are the realities, right? We're dealing with insurance, we're dealing with new things out there. I've been trying to get a timber building built for years now, and it's really, really challenging because at the end of the day, it's costs. I mean, I hate to say it, I've been trying now with one client who's super progressive and they want to, but when we keep getting the numbers back, it's like, this is just too expensive. So we've talked about trying to do it maybe just in parts of the building, which maybe that would work. I mean, the whole benefit of it, though, a timber building is that it's, you know, it's really the whole structure, that you're not kind of implementing systems or combining and making a hybrid. So, you know, there's many sustainable I'll say things that I'm trying to push for, and I don't always win them, but you know, to continue to keep pushing for it, I think is important. And it's tough though. I'm curious if anybody has any advice in terms of trying something new, these new systems in place. I'm seeing this a lot with modular, even though modular has been around forever. I do modular projects. I've worked in them. I was in front of a planning commission recently in Culver City, and they're like, we're scared of modular. Just the one commissioner, he's like, we're scared of modular. Modular, how can you stack it? Like, this seems like a problem. And I'm like, we've been doing this for decades. Like, this is not really new, but in their mind, it was new to them. And they saw it as a liability and not an asset. And so I think that gets back to the educating clients, educating people so they understand the benefits of it. But yeah, I'm curious, has anybody else like been successful with implementing a new sustainable program or element or products?
Yeah, hey, I'll say something quick. On the straw bale stuff, what I've done before is just tell the insurance company that it's cellulose insulation. And then they usually will be quiet about the rest of it. And then for the builders that are scared to try something new, I always offer to come out to the job site and train them and show them all the details of how to, you know, do the wrap properly and all that. And it usually is pretty funny because I'll get a funny response where they feel like threatened, almost like I'm showing them how to do their job. And like, okay, we got it. So it kind of just takes that first start of like, okay, I'll show you how to do it if you don't know how to do it. And then their egos get threatened a little bit. So it's kind of a funny thing, but
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah, I think taking the collaborative approach, and I mean, I'm sure we've all had experiences, but like there are times that I have that with nobody wants to feel, I hate to say, nobody wants to feel dumb or like they don't know what they're doing, right? Especially if that's something that is in their industry. So don't make people feel dumb. Just be like, hey, listen, I've done this before, or I'm familiar with this. Like, let me help you out here. And I think that that's a great approach, and you're more likely then to get it actually built. Like, so that's good. That's a really good recommendation. Anyone else?
I think you have to read, obviously know your client and read the room, but I don't want to sound dismissive, but when I was going through training and through school, it wasn't called sustainable design. It was called good design. And design schools taught, environmentally conscious design and good building systems and appropriate materials. And that was just good design. And somewhere we can get off on how LEED took the charge of this, but we've adopted this, it's sustainable design. And and frankly, I think that's why people get really suspicious. There's something, elective about it. And I look at it as good design. If you're doing the right, you're selecting the right materials, you're, you're siting your building correctly, you're providing the right resources for the owner. That's good design. So I kind of him away from the word, green design, sustainable design. I think earlier when you're talking about understanding the return on an investment, that is a very sound argument. Um, so I personally try to stay away from uh, the label, if you will.
That's great. I mean, that is such good advice because I do think that that's so true. We hear, humans collectively and culturally, depending on where we are in our society, we kind of hear certain things and we associate them with something. So, to your point, you hear sustainable. There's been all this greenwashing now with everything, right? And so it's like, what everything now is like sustainable, special product, and you're like, well, wait, they're just trying to get my money, right? And then you feel like you're being taken advantage of. So I do agree. It's just kind of like this base good design, right? And so it's hard. I know where I am, like I mentioned in California, there are policies that you just have to implement them. You're doing it. And yes, they are technically sustainable. The idea is that they're going to last long term and they're better for the environment than alternatives. But, you know, saying it, maybe not kind of treating it like, oh, well, this is a sustainable feature and selling it that way to your client, because then it just sounds like what they're probably seeing is just dollar signs, like, oh my God, this is going to cost me so much money. So how you word it really does matter. I think that's a really good point, Carl. The way that you communicate it and the labels and the terminology you use really does have an impact. That's very good. Very good advice.
Energy efficiency is another one of those trigger words. I
Mhm.
found that, yeah, pushing more durability, comfort, health, those things, and then using or saying efficiency is basically a byproduct of doing all those things is a better way to get clients on board.
That's such a good point, Matt. Yeah. I mean, it is true. There are just these terms now that people, unfortunately, they may have started off positive, but they have negative connotations to a lot of people. And so then it's just like, okay, well, maybe you want to avoid those, because how you were at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what's your goal? Is your goal to, you know, wax poet to your clients, or is it truly to like implement this system and implement something that you believe in? And if that's it, then you got to think about how you're approaching it and how you're selling it. All right, so let's move on here. So what are we at? We're at 10:50. So again, getting more into like balancing that money versus goals, which we've been discussing. We've been talking about that. But also some things that I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but I would say looking at phasing too. So, can you do partial implementations? Can you do maybe a baseline now and something that gets added on later, and discussing that with your client? And or maybe bundling particular incentives together that will hit kind of a goal. So instead of just saying, okay, I want, like, for instance, I know I talked about with the timber building, maybe we can't get the whole structure, but can we do elements of it or something? Could we do it maybe for like a podium building? So podium style building is where you have the, 2 levels of type 1 construction, which is like concrete or steel. And then you have wood above that. It's very common in residential, in multifamily residential. Well, maybe we can make the bottom 2 floors. And I don't believe the building codes allow for this yet, but maybe that's something for the future. Like, can we do just the bottom 2 floors as timber and the bottom podium, and then you do the standard wood construction above? Is that a possibility? So I think, thinking about that and phasing things and being a little bit more creative in our approach, as opposed to this is the system, this is how I want to implement it, because it's less likely to actually get integrated into the project and into the building. And then just kind of going back to what we were saying, looking at that short term versus that long term, making it clear, talking about, the the operating expenses, the investment, the net operating income maybe on a project if your client is a developer, talking about code risks as well, and what, what potential issues they could see. Insurance is a big one. I know insurance was brought up earlier. Insurance really can dictate how a building and what gets put into a building. And so I love what I believe it was Ryan had mentioned about, maybe you just tell the insurance company as well, this is cellulose, or you find other ways around that, creative ways. I think that's really smart. And then also, I think looking really at kind of at some strategies and tools. So are there ways that you can do passive first? I mean, I know we've all heard about passive design, passive house. Are there things that you can do that are more passive, like things that are a bit more creative? Also, maybe, various adaptive reuse is another thing that often gets overlooked, but it's really important. Can you take an existing building and can you reuse it? And it is more sustainable. But a lot of times there can be cost concerns with that. So that's not always the approach with clients. Also, looking at simple things like right sizing products for energy modeling. I can't tell you how many projects I've worked on where they weren't right sized. But you also don't need like this extensive analysis and these reports that then the client's like, oh wait, so I'm spending all this money for this like pure analysis. And you could really maybe kind of keep it more simple and just looking at what's truly needed. And that can also save a lot of money, but also helps from a sustainable standpoint. I know we've talked about, I'm just going to kind of run through this quickly so we can have a little bit of time for questions, but things like carbon calculators are helpful. There are rebates and incentives, and also looking at some resources out there that like Lead Well and LBC. Those are a few. All right, so last, I want to ask everybody, what are your biggest challenge with clients? Or we'll open up to just general questions that you might have at this point. So.
While we wait, I also want to add something that comes before you're actually like trying to convince a client to be more sustainable. That is like, how do you actually attract those clients that do care, right? And I know like we always talk about marketing, but because of the same things that Sam has talked about throughout the entire webinar, that it is that there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of education that needs to be done. A great platform for this is Instagram. So like, I know it's hard, and I know it's like, it feels secondary to put in the time and not natural to create reels, but these educational reels, that if you put them in your profile, the ones that last a minute and says, did you know that if you put this in the end, you end up saving 3 times as much? This is how, blah, 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 blah. And you can start branding yourself like this with very educational content. And that attracts a lot of the right clients. This is something that we can also help with, like we have video editors and things that we can help you with. But it is important that you're sending to the world the message that the people that are ready to listen to it, like can actually catch it. And you need to do it in a way that's modern and that actually gets the right audience. One day someone invented the word organic, right? And all of a sudden, anything that's organic can cost 20% more. So it's very easy to sell organic, right? Because they explained it, they marketed well, right? You can do that too.
It's a really, it's such a good point. And this is where I think, again, to the first point that I made, I think on the first slide, was that, we're not always the best at selling. We're not always the best at selling the value that we provide. And so to your point, Camila, go to these modern, right, marketplaces, because essentially Instagram is a marketplace, and put your message out there, make it clear, make it concise, and say like, this is what I believe in, this is, you know, this is what we want to implement. Did you know this? And it will attract more of the type of clients that you are looking for, or at least they share your same goals and your same approach to
Yeah.
design. It really
And
is.
then and then like a lot of clients sometimes they're like kind of stuck because they don't feel like yet they've had like the sustainable project that they would be proud of. So like they don't want to put it out there, right? Even if you don't have one project that like is where you'd like it to be yet, again, you can send the message with educational content that is needed about like what are the things that help, and then those right people will come to you. And another thing is people like when you're building a house or a building, it's a long-term investment. So people are very scared of long-term investments, especially in like in moments where like the future is uncertain. And you can kind of create like a concern just talking about trends. What is happening? What is happening in Denmark with sustainability? What's coming there? What's happening, you know, in China and Singapore? Like this smart cities that are being built. Again, create this feeling like this is gonna come here in the next 5 years, and like that's gonna hit your value. You know, those are all things that can be marketed very well and can be uh, put on Instagram, on TikTok, and then people are like asking the questions that then lead to interesting projects.
I think yeah, that's such a good point. It's also though about like showing them that value, what that value is, right? To that, whatever it is that you're interested. Let's say it's the, okay, you want to do EV charging stations. Like how do you sell that to that client, to clients that you say like you should be implementing this into all of your designs, into your house, into your, if you're a developer, if you're an institution, like all of your part, like how do you do that? Like what's the value? Who's going to be, you know, your end users, you're going to get different end users because of it. You're going to make money off of it because of it. You're going to, you know, you're going to save a lot of money as a homeowner ultimately over a 10-year period. So all of those things I think are really important to keep in mind as you're kind of selling this and marketing yourself to attract those kind of clients. And sometimes it's just, I feel like having the conversations with potential clients up front to get their, sometimes we think we're on the same page with clients and we think we understand them, but asking very pointed questions about their beliefs and their ideas behind good design. I'm not going to call it sustainable. I won't call it sustainable because Carl, now you're Carl, it's great. I'm kind of like training myself. I'm just going to call it good design. What's good design to you as a client? And, you know, can you, and maybe if they, you know, and having those conversations with them, be like, do you want something that is going to last for 100 years? It's really interesting. I worked on a project with I've worked with many developers, but I worked on one. It was the parent company was a Japanese based company, and their approach to development and design was completely different than the experience I've had with developers in America. And they looked at 100-year plans. They literally were like, okay, we don't care what happens in 5 years, in 10 years, in even 50 years. What is our 100-year plan for this development? And how does it impact us financially, environmentally, socially, culturally, all of that. And so it was just such a different approach. It's hard to change that kind of mindset in America, but you know, we can start working towards that, thinking of things more long term and how but also selling it in a way that's like, hey, even though this thing we're thinking long term, it's not going to necessarily negatively affect you in the short term. And that's the problem, is kind of contending with that, the short term pain with the long term gain. Like how do you balance that and how do you address it? And that's what's really, I think, if you can achieve that, if you can do that and show your clients, you're gonna win them over. You definitely will.
Well, amazing.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, one thing I was just going to say is strategy that we do that works pretty well is we'll do feasibility studies at the start of each project, and we always include an environmental sheet. So we'll just show like a wind rose, you know, which way the wind's coming. We'll do a quick solar study, and then like let them know what bioregion they're in. And it just starts the conversation of like, how does this house and project affect the environment? And then we can go as deep as they want.
I love it. That's so smart. And I'm assuming that's pretty relatively low cost for you and relatively simple to do, right, Ryan?
It's almost the same sheet every time. Yeah.
But it
Mhm.
just starts that conversation, it gets things going. And sometimes clients don't think of that, right? That you again, it's not like intentional, but it's just not really forefront in their mind. So you've got to kind of like bring it to the front of mind and say, hey, listen, this is important. We're at the beginning of stages. You should be thinking about these things now. And so just because you know it and it's up here in your mind doesn't mean that your client's thinking that way. So that's great.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Well, if no one has any other questions, because we're kind of on time, Sam, it's been amazing. Like, I think it was super interesting, super engaging. And thank you everyone for coming. I hope you took a lot of value out of this webinar and like all of Sam's advice. I also want to remind that for these things, for like, like Sam has an amazing assistant that also kind of helps with research, like with code or things, like she was mentioning, being updated is important. Things for Instagram, editing, whatever you need, like we can also help. So if you're not a client of ours yet, this is your opportunity to contact us. And Sam, again, you're the best. Thank you so, so, so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.